The valet line at the Beverly Grand shimmered with Rolls-Royces and limousines, each one depositing icons of wealth and fame under a canopy of crystal lights. Cookie Johnson stepped out of the black Bentley in a gown of deep emerald, her hand resting lightly in Magic's. Her smile was serene, polished, a quiet flame beside her husband's natural spotlight. Magic, in his signature tuxedo and million-watt grin, waved at familiar faces, already pulling attention as cameras clicked. Inside the ballroom, the air buzzed with designer perfumes, champagne flutes, and egos wrapped in silk. This was the annual Unity Foundation Gala, part charity, part silent competition of status. Cookie had attended before, but this year felt different. The room held a chill she couldn't name. They moved through the entrance slowly, Magic greeting NBA executives and celebrity couples, while Cookie offered gentle smiles. But then it started. A woman in a red dress, someone Cookie vaguely remembered from past events, tilted her head and said, "Oh, Cookie, you made it this year. Not unkind, not kind." A note of surprise, as if Cookie had stumbled into a space above her station. Cookie laughed softly, brushing it off. She was used to navigating the undercurrents of social spaces, especially where Magic's light outshined her own. But as the evening unfolded, it wasn't just one moment. It was many. At the coat check, her name was skipped. At the first round of hors d'oeuvres, the tray passed by her untouched. When introductions were made at their table, the host gave Magic a glowing accolade, then mumbled through Cookie's name, almost like an afterthought. She stayed composed, even as her heart pulled taut. She had faced worse: the tabloid scrutiny, the early years of Magic's fame, raising their son in a spotlight that didn't always forgive. But tonight, among supposed allies, there was a different sting. She wasn't just being ignored, she was being diminished. Across the ballroom, Magic was deep in conversation with a major tech philanthropist. Cookie stood alone for a moment, sipping her drink, her eyes scanning the chandeliers as if they could anchor her. That's when it happened. A woman, tall, bronzed, clearly a fixture of this elite circuit, walked by with a group. As they passed Cookie, she murmured, "Oh, she's just the wife," and they all laughed, not loudly, not to be cruel, but loud enough. Cookie felt her throat tighten. Her hand instinctively touched the base of her neck. She had worn this exact dress before, at another gala in New York where she'd been celebrated. She knew who she was, but in this room, her worth was being rewritten in real time by glances and half smiles. She looked for Magic. He wasn't far, maybe 20 feet away. He was laughing, charming, but even from that distance she saw it. The flicker of alertness in his eyes as he turned his head, noticing her stillness. The moment passed. He turned back. Cookie steadied herself, planting her feet with invisible resolve. She had learned long ago not to crumble, especially not in rooms like this. But this time, it wasn't about survival. It was about being seen. The night was far from over, and though she didn't know it yet, her husband was about to do something that would not only shift the tone of the evening, but change the way that ballroom would remember them both, forever. Cookie remained at the edge of the ballroom for a few minutes longer, watching the currents of conversation swirl around her. Every time she took a step toward a familiar face, a shoulder turned or a glass lifted, as if to form a barrier. She wasn't being excluded outright. It was subtler than that. An art of social erasure perfected by those who had decided long ago who mattered and who didn't. She returned to their table alone. Her place card was tucked slightly behind the centerpiece, partially hidden. She adjusted it discreetly and sat down, smoothing the folds of her gown. She smiled at the woman next to her, a board member's wife, but the woman barely acknowledged her. Cookie's smile didn't falter. It just faded slightly at the edges. She had lived a life adjacent to celebrity, but carved from something sturdier than limelight. She had stood by Magic during his HIV announcement, helped build businesses, raise children, mentored young women. Yet, somehow, in this space of social games and power plays, none of it seemed to matter. She glanced toward the entrance, remembering the first time she had walked into a party with Magic back in the 80s. Eyes had followed them then too, but with awe, not condescension. Now, decades later, she was still being measured, still being asked silently to prove her place beside her husband. A waiter passed with champagne. Cookie reached for a glass, but he shifted the tray away at the last moment, distracted, offering it to another group. She pulled her hand back as if burned. No malice, just absence, a kind of invisibility that left a mark. The woman across the table leaned in to speak with Magic's teammate's wife, but didn't include Cookie. Not a glance, not even a courtesy nod. It was as if Cookie were a mannequin dressed up for decoration, not a person with a story, a soul, a legacy. The final straw came during the welcome toast. The host, a man in a designer tuxedo and a voice thick with charm, stood and praised the foundation's major donors. To our athletes, our entrepreneurs, and their elegant partners, Lisa, Ava, Dominique, he said, listing names down the line. Cookie's was not among them. Magic was clapping politely, but Cookie could see the corner of his mouth twitch. He looked at her. For a moment, the noise of the room receded. She held his gaze. She didn't cry. She wouldn't. But her eyes told a story of exhaustion, of grace stretched thin, of a woman too dignified to shout but too powerful to ignore. She excused herself quietly, heading toward the garden terrace. Cool air brushed her skin as she stepped outside, trying to breathe through the burn in her chest. She looked up at the stars, wondering what more she needed to do to be seen for who she was, not who she married. From inside, Magic had watched her leave. The moment she disappeared through the glass doors, he stood. He shook one last hand, said something brief and started moving, purpose in every step. Magic Johnson had spent a lifetime lighting up rooms, but tonight he was about to redirect that spotlight. Not for a cause, not for a deal, for her. Magic pushed through the crowd, his tall frame cutting through clusters of murmured conversations and laughter. Every step toward the terrace felt heavier, pulled by the weight of what he'd just witnessed. Magic had always been the center of every room, but tonight he realized how many people had looked straight through Cookie. He opened the door to the garden quietly. Cookie stood near the stone railing, her back to him, arms folded. The wind toyed with a loose strand of her hair. For a moment he just watched her, remembering the woman who had stayed with him through fame, scandal, reinvention. The woman the world underestimated until they saw her strength. He walked up beside her and gently took her hand. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Her lips parted, then closed again. Finally, she said, "I'm tired, Irvin. Tired of being invisible in rooms I helped build." His chest tightened. He had always known Cookie bore things in silence that would have broken others. But this was different. He kissed her hand. "Come with me," he said. Back inside, the music had resumed. The gala was now in full swing, the dance floor filling slowly. Magic didn't wait for the next slow song. He walked her to the center of the floor and placed one hand on her waist, the other in hers. People turned, conversations paused. Cookie hesitated, self-conscious. But Magic smiled at her. Not the big celebrity smile, but the soft, private one she'd known since college. She breathed in. And then they danced. He leaned close and whispered, "They don't see you because they're not worthy of you. But I do. And tonight, I'm going to remind them who you are." As the song ended, Magic signaled to the DJ with a nod. The music faded. All eyes turned. Magic picked up a champagne flute and raised it. "May I have everyone's attention for a moment?" he called out. A hush fell over the ballroom. Glasses paused mid-air. Chairs turned. The spotlight, quite literally, returned to him, but Magic wasn't interested in talking about himself. "I want to take a moment to honor someone who rarely asks for credit, but deserves every bit of it," he began. People glanced around, curious. "Cookie Johnson," he said, turning to her. "My wife, my best friend, my partner in everything." Cookie froze. "She's not just Magic's wife. She's the reason I made it through the hardest days of my life, the reason our children are grounded and strong. The woman who built businesses behind the scenes, who prayed over every major decision, who carried the weight when the cameras weren't rolling. The room was silent. Someone near the back let out a quiet, "Wow." "She's never needed this room's approval, but I do need you to know if you respect me, then you must respect her, because I wouldn't be here without her." Cookie felt her eyes burn. Magic's voice never trembled. He wasn't performing. He was laying down truth like a foundation stone. He looked directly at the host, at the board members, at the socialite who had snickered hours before, then back at Cookie. "I see you. I've always seen you." And the room, once cool and dismissive, now began to shift. Slow applause began from the right, then another, a ripple, then a wave. Cookie stood there still and radiant, not smiling with triumph, but with quiet gratitude. For the first time that evening, she was no longer invisible. She was the center. The applause echoed through the ballroom, hesitant at first, then rising like a tide that couldn't be stopped. Some stood unsure if they should. Others followed, emboldened by Magic's conviction. It wasn't just a show of support. It was a silent admission. They had seen her. Too late, perhaps, but now they truly saw. Cookie remained still, overwhelmed but grounded, her fingers interlaced with Magic's, steadying her. The woman in red from earlier offered a small, almost sheepish smile. The board member's wife gave a polite nod. Others began to approach, slowly, reverently, like pilgrims seeking grace. One by one they arrived. "I just wanted to say, you're an inspiration," murmured a young philanthropist, eyes sincere. "I'm sorry we haven't spoken before," said another, a venture capitalist's wife. "You carry yourself with such strength." "I admire that." Cookie accepted each word with grace, not smugly, but with the dignity of someone who never needed validation, but received it now like balm on an old wound. The socialite who had made the "just the wife" remark stood a few feet away, hesitant. Her entourage had drifted. She watched the transformation of the room, how the center of gravity had moved from wealth and celebrity to something far deeper. Respect. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't approach. Magic, still beside Cookie, gave her space. He didn't dominate, didn't command. He let the spotlight linger where it belonged. He knew that a man's greatness is often measured by what he does when no one is clapping, and tonight, Cookie was getting the applause she had long deserved. Later, during dessert, the host returned to the microphone, clearing his throat. "I'd like to echo Magic's words," he said, awkwardly, "and express our deep appreciation for the powerful women in this room, especially Cookie Johnson." The applause returned, softer this time, but real. Afterward, the couple walked slowly along the ballroom's edge. A senator shook Cookie's hand. A tech CEO offered his wife seat at the next panel. A fashion house rep whispered something about a future campaign, but none of that mattered as much as the quiet moment that followed. They stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city lights. Cookie leaned against Magic's shoulder. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I did," he replied, wrapping his arm around her, "because silence is permission, and I'm done giving permission to rooms that forget who you are." She smiled, finally allowing herself to feel it, not pride, but release. The years of swallowing slights, of deferring and dimming, of shrinking in the name of peace, they didn't define her. This moment did. Back inside, people continued to talk about the speech, about the way Cookie had stood without flinching, about how Magic, the legend, had used his platform not to promote himself, but to elevate her. They weren't just another power couple anymore. They were a lesson. Some guests looked at their own partners differently. Some left feeling inspired, others chastened. But no one left unchanged. For the first time that evening, Cookie's laugh rang clear, private, genuine, full of light. And Magic, standing beside her, smiled the same smile he'd had when he first saw her across a college courtyard, when he knew he'd never love another woman the way he loved her. The gala's impact didn't fade with the last toast or the clink of departing glasses. In the days that followed, word of Magic's impromptu tribute traveled far beyond the ballroom. A video clip, just under 2 minutes, circulated across social media, shared by athletes, journalists, and everyday people alike. The caption read, "This is how you honor the woman who built the man." Cookie's inbox filled overnight. Requests poured in, not just for interviews, but for panels, keynotes, mentorship events. Women's groups wanted her voice. Fashion houses requested her presence. And yet she remained grounded, moving through each opportunity with the same quiet strength that had brought her through that long, cold evening. The most touching message came from a high school senior in Chicago who wrote, "Mrs. Johnson, I saw how you stood in that room. I want to walk into rooms like that someday, with grace even when they ignore me." Cookie printed that one and placed it on her desk. A month later, she wrote a personal reflection published in a major lifestyle magazine. In it, she described what it meant to be both seen and unseen in the same moment. She spoke not from a place of bitterness but wisdom, reminding readers that silence isn't always strength and that dignity is louder than cruelty. Meanwhile, Magic stayed mostly quiet about the night. When asked, he simply said, "My wife deserved that moment. I just gave the room a chance to catch up." One evening, as they prepared for another event, this time hosted in Cookie's honor, she paused at the mirror. Her earrings glinted under soft light. Magic adjusted his tie behind her and caught her gaze in the reflection. "You ready?" he asked. "I've always been ready," she replied. A year to the day after the Unity Foundation Gala, they returned to the same venue. This time, Cookie walked in first. She was greeted with warm hugs, firm handshakes, and genuine smiles. The same host who had once skipped over her name now introduced her as a keynote speaker. She stood at the podium later that night, not as Magic's wife, but as Cookie Johnson, author, philanthropist, businesswoman, survivor. She spoke briefly, but every word held weight. "We often teach our daughters to be resilient," she said. "But we must also teach our rooms to recognize that resilience. Don't just invite us, see us." The crowd stood before she finished. When the evening ended, she and Magic stepped outside together, hand in hand beneath the same starry sky. The air was warm, the night quiet. And this time, Cookie wasn't carrying anything heavy. She looked at Magic, her eyes soft. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head. "I didn't do anything special." "You reminded them," she said. "But you also reminded me." He kissed her forehead. "Of what?" "That I never needed the room's permission to shine." She smiled, and they walked forward together, the lights of the city flickering like applause far below. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable true life moments that reveal the quiet power behind public figures and private resilience. And now click on the video on screen to watch another story where grace, courage, and love rewrite what respect truly means.